I'm going to start by introducing Balance and then introducing Jeff.
I'll do a quick song between, and it's
There you go. And then I'm going to ask Jeff some questions specifically, and I'll open it up for everybody else, and then some time for everyone to socialize. So Balance was created to grow the global economy. And the purpose we looked at is, if you look at infrastructure anywhere in the world, it affects people's lives. Especially if you've been to a developing country, you'll see how it affects the happiness, how prosperous, how productive they are. And infrastructure anywhere from transportation to energy, waste management, communications to payments is really what falls into that category. So our mechanism, our facility for affecting the global economy is payments. That's what we do in general. And the most important part to us is focusing on working with companies that are creating new forms of commerce, that are essentially increasing GDP. And that's why we focus on marketplaces, networks, exchanges, and so forth. Now, Jeff, Andreessen Horowitz is a recent investor in Balance. And what we did 5 weeks ago is one of the partners in Andreessen Horowitz has a great presentation on marketplaces, and he was supposed to come and talk to the Balance team. And we decided to open it up to customers and potential customers and other people that we knew, and 50 people showed up in a day's notice. So we decided we'd do the same thing with Jeff. So Jeff is a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz. He originally went to Stanford for graduate school, worked at Disney as senior vice president of finance, went from there to Real.com.
the worst internet business ever.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. And from there went to eBay, then PayPal, and was the CEO of OpenTable. So to get started, could you just give us a quick background personally? Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, born in, I'm an East Coast guy. I was born in outside of Philadelphia. Lived in a town called Newtown Square. Grew up around Philadelphia till my dad, who liked politics, took a job in the Nixon administration for the President's Special Action Office for Drug Abuse Prevention. So we moved to Washington, D.C. That was the fight on heroin. The other kinds are fine. Yeah, and moved to Washington, D.C., where I was spending my high school years. Nixon's administration was over. We're moving back, and my father unfortunately got ill and passed away. So we ended up living in Virginia for longer, DC for longer than that. I went to college at Amherst College in Massachusetts, a little small New England school, kind of cool. I got to play basketball there because there weren't many schools that were small enough for me to play on the basketball team. Got out of college in 1981 in the Jimmy Carter years. And probably most people here weren't born at the time, but there was a horrible recession. The interest rates were close to 20%. Unemployment was massive, and I get out of college in that environment. Really good student, go to Philadelphia, and there are just no jobs. So over the course of I think 3 or 4 months, I got 3 interviews, got 3 jobs, and they all were insurance business jobs. So finally, I took a job in the insurance industry, which was just truly a wasteland. Did that for a few years and said, I like business, I got to get out of the insurance business, and applied to Stanford Business School. So came across country, got to California and said, whoa, no one told me about this. So I ended up staying here. I married a classmate. After school, I did actually a stint at the Boston Consulting Group for 3 years between San Francisco and LA, so I was a management consultant. Liked the hard problem, hated being an agent, so joined the Disney Strategic Planning Group, where my hiring manager was Meg Whitman, who will come back in the story in a second. Did Disney 4 years in the corporate group, 4 years CFO of the Disney store. Like getting closer and closer to operating a business. And then the internet was coming, late 90s. Disney's historic run was starting to fall apart, so I got offered a position with Real.com, with Hollywood Entertainment that was buying Real.com, and they were going to marry the physical assets of the Hollywood Video Store with the virtual assets of Real.com to create video on demand. And it's exactly how it played out about 14 years later. So there are a lot of ideas, sometimes are too early. So I did that for a year. It was horrible. Trying to go back, I was in Portland, Oregon, trying to go back to LA where my wife and I had started our family. And Meg heard that Meg desperately needed management. It was 1999. The bubble was still going on. Anyone who had a pulse had a job at that point, and so there was no one they could hire in the Valley. So Meg said, I heard Jeff's in Portland, Oregon. I know maybe no one's gotten to him yet. So I had almost taken a job down in LA, and she called and reached out and said, hey, love to have coffee and talk to you about eBay. And I'm like, okay, post-IPO, Beanie Babies, you just kind of like, I'm strategizing with my wife, how do I tell her no? And so, sit down, and she starts talking about this was really early at eBay. I think there were 200 people in the company. She started talking about what she thought eBay could become, and very persuasive and very compelling. So I went from the absolute worst business model in the history of the internet to arguably one of the best. I joined, ended up joining, managed 2 people when I joined. 7 years later, it was 6,000. So, that talk about it's the first thing essentially I'd ever run was eBay.com and then PayPal.com. And so that's one way to learn that, the throw into the deep end of the pool. I liked it more when I was managing 2 than when I was managing 6,000. So, at some point she was doing succession planning, and I was the internal candidate to take her job if she got hit by a bus. And so they asked if, did you actually want her job? And I thought about it for a while, and I went back, nope. So I ended up leaving, took a little time off, and was trying to figure out what to do. And the Open Table people called, and one thing I admitted from the story is the only job I had before insurance was I was chef in restaurants. Actually, a pretty good chef in restaurants. At one point, my career decision came down cooking school or business school. So when the CEO of Open Table decided that 1, they should take Open Table public, and 2, he didn't want to run a public company, they launched a search, and the benchmark partner who was on eBay, Bob Cagle, heard that there was a search going on and said, oh, call Jeff. He knows network effects businesses, and he was a chef in restaurants. He's perfect for Open Table. And so that's actually how I got the job, believe it or not. And so I did that for 4 years. We took it public in 2009, which anyone who will remember that wasn't quite the best market. This was the first IPO that had gone out from venture-backed IPO in something like 2 years. But phenomenal business. And then, after I think it's 14 years running internet businesses, I was ready for a new challenge. And so I started talking to Mark and Ben about being a general partner. I've been there about 2 years. I already have, I think, 9 investments. I just came from the Airbnb board meeting, Pinterest, Fab, CrowdTilt. It's now balanced. Privileged to work with some incredibly energizing companies.
So you have an interesting background in terms of both online e-commerce, marketplaces, and physical commerce. So running the Disney stores, especially on the finance side, what did you see then in terms of what was going to change?
I didn't see it then. I knew that the internet was going to be powerful, but with the benefit of that experience, it's made me maniacally bullish on e-commerce and marketplaces. Physical retail has so much investment to do. You invest in stores, physical locations. You're literally pouring cement. Then you invest in warehouses to fill those stores. Then you stock the stores with inventory. So you have inventory replicated at all the different locations. And you have to staff the stores, from 9 to 9, 7 days a week, in spite of the fact that no one shops at a bunch of those hours. But you've got a store open. You compare that with an e-commerce company. You need a warehouse, and you need pick-pack people, and typically the labor efficiency is 5 times higher at a e-commerce player than at a physical store player, just because it's there. So it's an e-commerce and marketplaces have an unbelievable cost advantage. So I believe personally they're going to run the table. I think physical retail is in a world of hurt. What happens, and they get into a death cycle. So the total pie of retail is growing really slowly right now. But the online share is getting really material in a number of categories. I think the overall average is 8, but when you take out grocery and you take out drugstores, categories like apparel and electronics and media are 15 to 25%. which means the part of the pie available to offline retailers is being shrunk. And they're these incredibly highly leveraged businesses that if their sales come down a little bit, they just start losing money. So, some of you may remember Circuit City. I mean, it's a little death spiral, comp store sales fell just enough, they're bankrupt. Best Buy is about to go bankrupt. You look at their financials, they're about to go. I mean, you just, virtually no retailer in America is opening stores. Mall vacancy rates are really high, so they're going to have to plow malls. But we believe it's just this seminal shift in commerce is just going to, the majority of commerce is going to be online. And just because it's cost advantaged, it's increasingly just as efficient. Amazon doing same day delivery, Walmart's trying to replicate it. I mean, there's no reason to shop at malls for many of the items you buy anymore, and e-commerce is just going to clean the table.
So this brings up another interesting question for me. My fiance has like a very different mentality from me. She was really sad when the border shut down in downtown Palo Alto.
So was I.
Yeah, and I have a Kindle and I read on that, and she hates it. And I'm like, well, look, you can magnify and do all this other stuff. And for my birthday present, she bought me a book and a magnifying glass.
Someone call her a Luddite, but that's a...
But then that's the question is, where's the space left for physical commerce? Is it all going to get disrupted?
I mean, I'm not sure it all does. There's some things that have a pretty good reason for being, in local communities. I think the home category, Home Depots of the world are going to do pretty good. Big, heavy product. A lot of the people need it today. I mean, I think grocery is largely going to stay intact and things like that. Although, you look at the investment Amazon's making. Lewis Borders just raised money for Webvan 2.0, essentially. He decided he was just 12 years too early the first time. And he's got a pretty compelling argument for it. I mean, so I think there are pockets that exist, and I think the prime shopping districts, Union Square, Stanford Shopping Center, will be the last to go. But something like 20% of the U.S. malls, large malls, already have a vacancy rate over 30%. And when you're walking around a mall that's at least 30% vacant, it's a dead man walking. And so there's this great website called deadmalls.com where you can go and celebrate all the dying malls and all the malls you grew up with. And but it's there. It's interesting though. My wife and I do all ebooks. Our 18-year-old twins prefer physical, which is kind of weird, but that's...
Hipsters?
Yeah.
So then, electronics seemed to me to be one of the first places where it was easy to categorize, it was easy to compare.
They're commodities.
So that's exactly right. So what's next? What are some of the different other categories that are going online?
Yeah, I think media was the first to go, and it happened two ways. First, Amazon was selling books and CDs online, and then they digitized them. So there used to be I grew up with vibrant bookstores, music stores. You go to the music store and you browse. You can't find a music store anymore. I mean, it's completely gone. I think electronics are next because they truly are commodities. I mean, Canon produces a camera, it's the exact same camera, there's a number on it, and they want it distributed everywhere, so you compete on price and convenience. So, and e-commerce wins that dramatically, particularly because of Amazon's maniacal focus towards massive scale and low prices. No one can catch them. And then you're seeing apparel go faster. The least intuitive concept I know of was Zappos. When I first heard it, it's like, I'm going to buy shoes online? I mean, the fit is so important. How does that work? They made a real good business. The proof point for me is Warby Parker. I mean, prescription eyeglasses online. I mean, come up with one thing that would be a less likely candidate to go be online than prescription glasses. Have to have the prescription, has to fit, has to look good. I mean, all kinds of things. Yet they're thriving selling high fashion glasses at about a quarter of what you buy from your optometrist. And so, I mean, when those categories start going, you say like, okay, anything's game. So, I mean, we're investors in Fab, all things design. Zulily, the biggest e-commerce website you've never heard of. They were $500 million when we invested, and they're about 2.5 years old. Julep, online beauty brand, Shoe Dazzle shoes. That's my partner John's investment. But we're just such a believer that it's coming, and as stores disappear, the only alternative is to buy those categories online, essentially, or drive 20 miles. And so that, I mean, so it's going to go in step functions, but the relentless gains, I mean, I think that's why I do what I do. I think it's pretty fun to project them out.
So your investors also in Airbnb, in CrowdTilt, in Balanced.
Yeah.
So what's your view on, and a lot of the people here run or work in marketplaces. So what's your view on what's going to happen, what marketplaces are going to enable in commerce?
First of all, I love marketplace businesses. I mean, so the most fun I've ever had in a business was eBay. And the damnedest thing about eBay, I mean, I liked microeconomics in college. eBay was applied microeconomics. Early on, professors were using eBay to research because it actually was a self-contained economy where you could track all the activity going on and the impact of supply and demand, the impact of pricing and incentives, the impact of, site changes, everything was game, and the business would respond. We use pricing just for behavior. I mean, we launched Buy It Now early on. eBay was an auction-only site, and we launched Buy It Now, and everyone started buying it because we gave them a little more real estate. But they were using it in a way, they just were buying the real estate. They didn't set a realistic buy it now price. They just everyone was adopting it, but they were really shitty prices. So I think we started charging a dime extra for a buy it now listing. And all of a sudden, that real estate came for a cost. And what happened is they kept buying it, but their prices dropped like crazy because they said, okay, I'm actually going to price it at something that will sell. And so the conversion rate from a dime increase in a listing fee tripled. And I just found that the coolest damn thing you could ever imagine. So I love marketplace businesses. What you're finding is in all kinds of verticals, people are coming up with new ways, new marketplaces to run. Some of the more interesting ones, Science Exchange, I don't know, you've seen, they're putting scientific experiments online. I mean, literally, they're research labs that have bought really expensive equipment. You can assay a gene sample, whatever the hell you do with a gene sample, and you can buy it. They've created a marketplace for that. And I mean, Mateen had a slide in his deck that resonated a ton. First, I believe, tell me if I'm wrong, it started with Craigslist, and I personally believe that every single category in Craigslist is going to spawn a great internet business. And so I'm a sucker for the pitch of we're going to take over. I mean, I just came from Airbnb. That's where they started. I'm a sucker for that pitch. And he's okay. Here's all the Craigslist categories, and then here are all the marketplaces that are attacking different parts of the ecosystem. And we see this all day. We get pitched a marketplace a day, and so to be the payment. And by the way, marketplaces have really unique solves, both from a product perspective plus a regulatory perspective, so we believe that marketplaces are going to just exponentially expand, the sharing economy type things with unique requirements, and that's why we're investing in your company.
So so I've heard from a few different people that the word eBay is best place to ask is that every time eBay goes into a new market, they're supply constrained, not demand constrained. So supply constrained being the main problem is trying to get sellers, and then demand constrained, main problem trying to get buyers. So is that right? How did you think about to address different markets and figure out where the problem was and define your priorities based on that? So
my good colleague Todd Lutwack, who was here, and he was much more recently at eBay than I was, who presented the last session, he and I will probably disagree on this. For the marketplaces I've run, eBay, I think OpenTable has a lot of these characteristics. Most of them, the value is in the buyer, in the consumer. Because in the online auctions, eBay's got a lot of early traction, and within a couple months, Amazon launched auctions. This is in the late 90s. Amazon launched auctions, and Yahoo launched auctions. And they quickly got to almost the exact same amount of inventory that eBay had. But there were no buyers there, and so the stuff didn't sell, but everything put on eBay would sell. Half of what was put on eBay was selling. We had the buyers. The sellers went to wherever the buyers were. And so OpenTable was the same thing. We needed a critical mass of restaurants, but what kept them there was the diners. The restaurants will go wherever the diners are. So the enduring asset for most of the marketplace businesses I've been involved with is the demand side of the equation. We're sensing a little different dynamic in some of the sharing economy things, where they actually have copious demand and supply constraints seem to be the limiter. And so a little bit of divergence in those two. So for most marketplaces, it's funny, in eBay, PayPal, and OpenTable, the seller pays you, but the buyer is the reason you're successful. So it's this odd thing where you're making sure your buyers are happy, even though your sellers are the one writing the checks. And I believe firmly in that strategy for most of the marketplace, outside of the sharing economy, the marketplaces I've run. At OpenTable, we did some revolutionary things, like we put reviews on the site. I couldn't believe it was like 2007 and they didn't have reviews. The restaurants hated our putting reviews on. So the people paying our checks are just like, over my dead body, because you're my technology vendor. I don't want you to publish a bad review from a customer. Take it down. And we managed the process through the restaurant, but the site was much more useful to diners. More diners used it, and the restaurants got more reservations. But there's that interesting tension between who writes the check and where the real value in the business is. And in most businesses is on the demand side.
Airbnb to me is the best case of supply constraint. There's no shortage of people who are trying to stay in exotic locations or not pay $800 a night in Manhattan.
Yeah.
But there's a shortage of people who want to let somebody stay at their place. So,
which is fascinating also, because there's a shortage of people who are earning as much money as they want to be earning, and a lot of them have an asset in their home. So it's an interesting early phenomenon. So I think Airbnb probably is is supply constrained. Right. And so one of the things Brian and that team are working on is, there is a ton of friction in both sides of the equation on Airbnb. And early on, they thought their key product component was the point in time the website. They were responsible for the electronic portion, and their community was responsible for the other portion. I think Brian, Joe, and Nate had a revelation late last year that they're actually responsible for the entire experience. So if you have you walk into a place and it's dirty, or just the host is unresponsive, or the key exchange was a ton of friction, that's an Airbnb experience, even though they didn't directly control it. So increasingly, they're viewing their purview as they have to provide a great beginning to end experience, not just their part. So they've got this really formal project going on to try to take friction out of the system. And so they think that'll make it a better guest experience, but a ton of the friction of the host. So if you rent your place and, should there be a service to help transfer the key if you're away that night? The big one, can someone clean my place right after someone leaves? So, or has that got to be me, which means I have to dedicate 3 hours to, getting to the place. And the first thing I do when I get home from a trip, to New York is, let me clean all the sheets and, do all this. So they're looking for an ecosystem that takes friction out of the system, but they view their responsibility as the entire experience on both the demand and the supply side, not just the web component of the experience, which I think is a really healthy and really exciting avenue for them to go.
Well, then how do marketplaces end up competing with traditional e-commerce? There's Fab, but at the same time, we do payments for a company called Fancy, where they started as an online picture board like Pinterest, but now they're a great place to buy amazing things that's curated by the community.
By the way, the Fab sale just started at 4, but that's sorry. They're different value.
It's like community curation versus centralized curation and sent by.
I think there's room for all of them. I was actually running some numbers the other day. Something like a little over a third of all e-commerce in the U.S. already comes from 2 marketplaces. eBay and Amazon Marketplace. A third. So I think it's like $270 billion in total e-commerce in North America, and a third already comes from 2 marketplaces. So so marketplaces can be competitive. So it's kind of like, okay, what are they competing on? I mean, I'm involved in probably the couple of the most diametrically opposed approaches to this. I mean, Fab is, for me, is beautiful curation. Bradford Shellhammer, the head merchant on that site, picks beautiful product, merchandises them beautifully, but very top-down, company provided. And then I got Pinterest, it's crowdsourced curation, on steroids. And so both can work. And so it's, I think, the biggest thing is what's your consumer value proposition and what's your merchant value proposition. I mean, it turns out Fab and Zulily are both technically marketplaces. They're aggregating product from a long tail of talented designers that lack national distribution. So they don't, the majority of product there, they're just procuring from small guys, but the small guys it's equivalent to an eBay and Etsy seller as, you can probably get. They just have a specialization.
What are the biggest constraints for online commerce in general and for marketplaces to grow faster? I mean, it's growing, but why isn't it growing even faster than it is now?
Well, I think some of the constraint is innovation constraints. I mean, for me, Amazon is a gorilla in terms of competing. If they've got something like 20% of all e-commerce is sold in the U.S. sold on the Amazon site, but they do really poorly in apparel. And so if you take the categories they participate in, it's more like 30 or 40%. So anyone has to. Anyone who's in e-commerce has to figure out a strategy how to dance around Amazon. And so I think Amazon's actually a constraint because they're just such a punishing competitor. Huge scale, low prices, moving towards, same day free shipping, how do you compete with that? And I just had a blog post, early on at eBay, we thought our biggest competitor was Google because eBay is where you went to go try to find really hard to find items, stuff you couldn't find in the mall. And then Google became a way to find those same hard to find stuff. Completely different business model, but the consumer now had a choice between, do I want to buy it on the eBay marketplace or hunt for it on Google? I think Amazon is the biggest threat to Google right now, Google search. Because if you want to buy something right now, you can go to Amazon and the search is pretty damn good. I can find a product typically in 15 seconds. With one click purchase, I can buy it in 10 seconds. And they deliver it to me increasingly same day or next day for essentially free. If you go to Google, you have to, you search for the product category, you're delivered a forest of listings. Each of those you have to go into, find the price, then find the shipping cost. And then if you haven't bought from that merchant before, you have to enter all your payment details. And so and then that merchant typically can't ship with the speed of Amazon. So it's much slower to buy, it's much more friction, and it takes a lot longer, and it's typically higher priced. And it's like, okay, which of those do you want? So I mean, Amazon's winning because they provided just a killer start to end, user experience. But Google makes the majority of their advertising revenue. But I think 44 or 46 billion of Google's revenue last year was advertising, and the majority of the advertising is retail categories. So if Amazon's growing like that, and Google's growing like that, what's happening to Google's product revenue in that world as you play it forward? So it's for me, the user experience wins.
I think you said in your blog post that Amazon and eBay are two of the biggest advertisers on Google.
So the existential question is who's taking whose customers. So so Amazon is one of the largest advertisers on Google. Are they smart because they're stealing Google's users, or are they dumb because they're writing one of the biggest checks to their arch competitor? It's kind of an interesting existential question.
So I want to take a big step back now and actually talk about some of the things that you've personally done professionally and personally as well. So eBay, you had to manage actually let's take an even further step back. How did you get into Real.com? That was the thing is that I view it as you learn in many ways more from failures
I agree
than from success. So how did you get to that point where you joined Real.com? First of all, and why did you join in the first place, and what did you learn from that, and then what you would do afterwards?
I joined for a bunch of reasons, and in retrospect, I think we're wrong. So but it is interesting. So I stumbled into being a CFO of a retail company. At Disney, the CFO was kind of the strategy partner for the business, and I was the strategy guy. So they made me CFO, and I'm like, I'm not an accountant. I don't know what to do. But the head of this company, Hollywood Entertainment, had been trying to recruit me to be his CFO of a public company, Hollywood Video Stores, now bankrupt. So something to be said there for years. And so I was working at Disney, and a couple things were obvious. The internet's coming. Disney's not going to have a play in it for a while. And Disney had been in a historic run. It was running out. I'm CFO, and you're getting calls from the company CFO saying, do you have any legitimate accounting opportunities that would improve results? And you're like, that's a really bad question. I mean, that's not the leading indicator of, hey, things are really good at the company question. So one was Disney's run was running out, and two was the internet was coming. So this guy had been chasing me for years, and he calls me one day and goes, I know you're interested in the internet. I'm just telling you, we're buying Real.com, then the largest movie e-commerce site at the time. This was before Amazon launched movies. And it's just like, okay, it's a way to get in the internet. So I did join him as CFO. Within 6 months, he was planning to take Real.com public and asked me if I wanted to run it. So I was stupid. I said yes. Let me describe Real.com when I took it over. It was spending $40 million in marketing to sell $40 million of DVDs at a gross margin loss. So we're hopefully going to make it up in volume somehow. I mean, it was. I mean, it's the worst thing you could ever imagine, and we were taking it public in 1998. I mean, and the bankers are lining up and the lawyers are lining up, and you go, this could be the worst business in the history of business. And and then Amazon launched. It was a bad business before Amazon launched. And then you're just like, so I extricated myself from being CEO of a e-commerce company during the bubble, going public. I had so little conviction in this company. And I left, they put someone else in charge, and 4 months later, they closed it. I mean, just because the bubble burst and they looked at it and go, oh, that's ugly. But it was pretty when the capital markets looked attractive, and it was horrible when it was. So it was a terrible experience. I mean, lots of things went wrong. I made a lot of decisions for the wrong reasons. It actually did bring a conviction in me that I find it valuable to work with people who have experienced failure. So the single best hire I made at eBay was a guy named Michael Deering. And Michael now runs a early stage fund called Harrison Metal. Michael's one of the smartest guys I'll ever meet, brilliant guy. I worked with him at Disney, and he got the entrepreneur's itch pre-internet and started a small chain of shoe stores, physical shoe stores called Industrial Shoe, high fashion Hollywood stores. And the individual units were actually working. They were very profitable. But his relationship with his partner, the guy who provided his financing and his shoes, soured, and they ended up in litigation. I mean, it was just so horrible. They closed it down, and he's just walking around like, oh, it's the worst thing in the world. But now I've landed in Silicon Valley, where there's no one with a heartbeat who doesn't have a job. Michael's down in LA, abjectly depressed and unemployed. So, I brought him to
Match made in heaven.
But yeah, no, perfect. Hey, come on. But he was unbelievably valuable to the company, and I think part of the value was just the perspective of, listen, we're in a historic world, it can be ephemeral. He was very into internet product. He was very strategic, and I mean, he created enormous amounts of value at that company. And so there are others, it's the same kind of thing. I love getting people on a bounce experience. People who have shown success through a lot of their careers, but they've had the adversity. For me, that's a great hire, because that means, it's funny, a couple of my companies, we're going straight to the moon, little turbulence comes, and a lot of the people who've never experienced failure freak out. It's like, oh my God, I hope things turn around. And the CEO's like, only if you turn them around, only if we turn them around. I mean, this doesn't happen on its own. And so it's interesting. I like people who had something thrown in their way and had to climb over it.
So Meg was an advisor to you. Meg Woodman was an advisor to you.
She was a boss twice.
Yeah. So so what's your recommendation for people? How do you go pick the right advisors? Whose advice do you listen to? Because someone bad advice is like worse than no advice.
Yeah. No, it is interesting. First of all, I became a belief in seeking advice and seeking mentors. When I was managing eBay, I mean, going from 2 to 6,000 people in 7 years, having never really managed anything before, I was CFO, I wasn't general manager, I made a lot of mistakes. And fortunately none were fatal, but boys, I mean, talk about accelerated learning. So one of my very good friends, ironically, is John Donahoe, who's now CEO of eBay, but he's a neighbor and I've known him since business school, and he was running Bain at the time. And I remember talking to him a few times of like, this stuff's hard. I mean, and he's laughing at me. And he goes, this was back before he was disgraced. Tiger Woods has a strength coach and a conditioning coach and a swing coach. You gotta find, it shouldn't be a sign of shame that you want to improve yourself. And so he had a coach that he used full time. I ended up using the same guy. That was one. I joined this organization called YPO, that Young Presidents Organization, that is a bunch of people who run companies, get together and try to commiserate and learn. I think there's parts of that experience that were great for me. I met some really interesting people to be peers.
I've heard it called group therapy.
Yeah, I've heard it called group therapy. But it's through that I met people who I admired, who had already fought through the challenge I was trying to fight through. So I found there were a few people that I became very reliant on, but it was just a few. I'm relatively introverted. I don't want to spread my woes of misery broadly. So I pick a few confidants. I work with one CEO I think is phenomenal, a founder, who does the other way. He's got like 15, and they're all for different things. This is my creative guy. This is my such and such guy, and it's working for him. I went the other way, but I can't tell you how valuable I think it is, because if your business becomes successful, you almost immediately are thrust in the role where you're managing more than you ever did. I mean, before I joined Open Table, I was hanging with Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, and Mark called me one day, or emailed. I think he probably emailed me. He probably didn't call, and said, "I'd love to meet you." A couple people told me I should. I'm trying to find some people who built the thing I'm trying to build. So I went and talked to him. This was 2006 probably. So Facebook had just kind of moved out. They were still above the Indian restaurant on University. And I went and met with Mark, and it was a fascinating meeting. I mean, clearly it was brilliant, but he goes, listen, I've never run a company before, so I'm trying to find someone who can help me run a company. But it's a little worse than that. I've actually never worked in a company before. and so how do I become CEO of this company that I'm convinced can be, and he convinced me it was going to become a company, when I've actually never even worked in one before. So he went and found people to be mentors. Almost every CEO I work with at Andreessen Horowitz is now managing a bigger organization than they've ever managed in their life. And some of them are A-round investments. I mean, so it happens fast. And so you need, you're called upon to do things you've never done before. So probably the most common conversation I have with some founders is just like, I'm running into these 3 challenges this week. Have you ever seen this? Do you have any suggestions? And by the way, I never tell them, this is what you should do. I said, I had a couple analogous situations. Here's what I tried. This worked for me. This didn't work for me. I've seen people do that. So it's not never telling them what to do, but just kind of like, just pattern recognition, observation, mirror, just all the things you can do. But I think it's incredibly invaluable. And everyone here is self-sufficient, doesn't want to ask for help. But if you've never done something before, you've never seen it done, when we invested in Pinterest, it was 8 people. Now it's about 100, and so Ben's never managed 100 people. Airbnb was 30 people. I think there are 600 or 700 now. Brian had never really worked in a company, and so I mean, just you're getting these, just these things just explode. And so when they work, they explode, and so everyone gets challenged with things they haven't done before. So I mean, I can't advocate more strongly. Find someone who you admire, someone you respect, someone you've seen, just a network, and figure out the strategy where you can, try to get that. One of the things I love is the non-investor side of the startup scene is increasingly networked. So the sophistication of a lot of you guys in here, when you come see, it's funny. We look at a lot of geographies. the sophistication of the average Silicon Valley entrepreneur is higher than the sophistication of the average entrepreneur in city X, Y, or Z. And I think it's just the networking that goes on in the back where, they haven't done it before, but you go find your friend and you go, okay, I have, the second meeting with this partnership, what are they going to ask? How does that play out? And you go to other cities and they're incredibly talented people, but they're not drinking the same water. And so it manifests itself a lot in the gear. In Silicon Valley, there's a gear. When a good entrepreneur the business starts running, they just throw fuel on the fire. They go for it with all they can. They take huge amounts of risk, because you're not going to get there by, steering carefully at, 32 miles an hour. Other cities, you see the entrepreneurs going at 36 miles an hour. And so, it's interesting. I bought the shirts from this company I love called Leadberry. They're in Richmond, Virginia, I think, or Norfolk, Virginia. And I buy so many of the shirts. They fit, they do great. I finally reached out to the founder and I go, hey, I'm an investor. I love your shirts. Tell me about the company. And, it was a great story. He was in the UK, developed appreciation for shirts, went back, built this brand. I think he's done a really good job building the brand. But, he didn't have a lot of money, he didn't raise much, and he was spending about $8 a month on marketing. And so the business, which I expected to be this big, was this big. And I said, you've got something. You got to go for it. He goes, yeah, we're going to raise, a couple $100,000. And you're just like, ah. And so there's something in this, in the ecosystem here, and in the networking and the connection that I think is really special and really rare and really exciting.
What do you see are some of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs are making now?
It's the rare entrepreneur who will really go for it. All the value in venture is created by a few companies every year. We've done the statistical, proof on this. Looked at company formation over time, returns over time, consumer versus enterprise, early stage, late stage. And like 6 or 8 or 10 companies every year create something like 80% of cumulative venture earnings. So it's a hit-driven business. So many people bail early. Even it's working, but when you get offered life-changing money, no criticism. It's just there. Reputedly, this is third-party sources. Mark Zuckerberg on the Yahoo offer. Growth at Facebook hit a couple of those speed bumps. Believe it or not, it wasn't straight to the moon. It did this, like 4 times. During one of the speed bumps, Yahoo came and offered $1 billion or $1.2 billion. And Mark's entire management team yelled in unison, "Sell!" and he said no. And huge blowback from his team. They couldn't believe it. Nope. The destiny of this business is that. That is a rare characteristic to be. Your entire team that you built screaming. Your metrics have taken a pause, and yet, nope.
I'm sure the response wasn't that easy for him. It's probably like a few nights of.
I'm sure it was, but the call he made was,
Yep.
I do not think Facebook would be what it was if it was Yahoo social networking. By the way, I showed up at eBay, and what they didn't disclose in the interview that they were having acquisition conversations with 2 parties. One was AOL, and I didn't know about this even after the fact, where the entire management team disappeared one day. And I'm looking around kind of like, no Meg, no Pierre, no CFO. Turns out they were in Reston, Virginia for a meeting with AOL on acquisition talks. And they got there and they sat there all day. And and the guys are coming in, poking their head in, saying, "We'll be there in a minute." What's his name? Meyer Burlow and David Colburn and Case, popping in and saying. Turns out, in the other room was Time Warner. They were both there at the same time, so they opted to do the Time Warner deal. Send eBay home basically without a meeting. And so then it turns out we're in talks with Yahoo, and one of my first jobs is you go due diligence on Yahoo and get involved with the deal, and that deal was done. I mean, Tim Kugel was the CEO. This is 99 or early 2000. The deal was agreed in principle. I actually was told it was done. I went to Tahoe to ski with my family. The phone rings when I'm up there saying it fell apart. It fell apart? What did it fall apart over? Tim Kugel was CEO. Jeff Mallett was president, ran most of the company. Meg had extracted an agreement from Tim Kugel to report directly to Tim, which means he and Jeff were peers. Jeff went crazy, went to Philo, got Philo to vote against the deal at the last minute, and the deal fell apart. So eBay was almost Yahoo auctions at the time, and now you're looking at, but for the grace of God, goes at 60 billion in market cap versus, ex-Asia, 6. So it's like, oops,
I want to open it up to everybody here to ask questions, but the last one I have is, most people don't know this, but the name for Balance actually came where I was walking home one day and I was struggling with how difficult it is to have a work-life balance. And I couldn't have named the company Unbalanced. So Balance was the name that came out. But what I found out is that you spend a lot of your time with your family playing basketball. Has that always been the case? Is that something that you learned at a certain point? And that's a hard thing for entrepreneurs. I've seen companies fall apart because someone just burns out.
Yeah, no, wasn't an easy thing at all. And at eBay, it was wild. So I had young kids. I have twins. So when I joined eBay, they were probably 5 or 6, and so I got a reputation. I quickly found out if I didn't work out, I was going to explode, both in size as well as in stress. Working out is an enormous stress reliever for me. So I developed a reputation for being in the gym at eBay at 5:30 in the morning. The head of engineering and I used to meet in the lobby pretty regularly. She was going home for the night, and I was coming in. I mean, it was just kind of, it was like the wrestling thing where you're on, and then I would try to get home before my kids would fall asleep during the week. So I was not very good during the week in terms of family. I was a pretty good weekend dad. I'd carve it out, but lots of regret. I mean, it's hard to regret it, but just I wasn't there to the extent I wanted to be. After eBay. My financial situation changed fairly materially. And then you're confronted with, okay, they're older now. My kids were, 10 or 11. And, there's a point at which, they know that dad's making a choice not to be home. So one of the reasons I chose OpenTable was I thought it was a job I could do. I mean, when I joined, it was 200 employees in a vertical that I knew well, that I could actually get home. So I made dinner virtually every night if I wasn't traveling when I worked at OpenTable. The trade-off is I will get up as early as I need to in the morning to be able to work out and get everything done. And so I'm, the standard mornings at 5 a.m. There were 4 and 3 a.m.s just because I was trying to be home for dinner. So then part of it is just what your prioritization are. So I play basketball twice a week still, mountain bike 2-3 times a week, in the gym the other days. But if I get up early enough, I'm still the first person into the Andreessen Horowitz offices. So part of it is just the priorities you set and what you make. Mine is I don't stay up late and I don't get much sleep. Yeah. So I got in balance, some level of balance through that. Yeah.
So I want to open it up for questions, people in the audience. All right. Oh.
Yeah.
So you were saying.
All right.
We're going to use the questions on the microphone. Make sure it's on.
So you were saying that the average entrepreneur in Silicon Valley is more sophisticated than in other places, and yet if you look at incubators like 500 startups, they got 26 startups, and only 6 of them are from the United States. Yep. So I was wondering what were your thoughts on this more expansion on investment internationally, and if it's like a healthy thing, if you're saying that entrepreneurs are not as sophisticated, what are kind of dangers there?
So I probably phrase it slightly differently. There's less of a network to support them, which makes it harder for them to be as sophisticated. Some are. I mean, it is pretty amazing great net businesses, great tech businesses can be built anywhere now. I mean, and there's some unusual hotspots. Scandinavia right now is a hotspot. It's just, I'm not sure what they're doing. Maybe it's the sun, because the sun doesn't shine. They have a lot of time to. But I mean, just you look at the business, number of businesses there. I'm of my whatever investments, 4 are outside of the Bay Area, and they're all. I mean, it's fab. No one's as aggressive as Jason Goldberg, Julep, Zulily, and Belly in Chicago. And so, I mean, so I think they're great businesses built everywhere. There's something about the depth of the Valley ecosystem and the amount of networking that goes on here that I think it leads to, that the other guys struggle with and crave. So I mean, I've talked to Logan Lahive at Belly, and there are 3 or 4 serious net entrepreneurs in the city of Chicago. In Seattle, I think there are 4 or 5 companies. You got, you have Amazon, Microsoft is there somewhat. Zulily's turning into big, Julep, but then it's just, what else is there? Oh, Zillow. But I mean, just, so they're little pockets, but you don't get that depth in many places. And I think, the really strong entrepreneurs figure out a way around it and become extremely sophisticated. I mean, Jason at Fab is as sophisticated as any net entrepreneur I'd work with and as aggressive as any net entrepreneur I work with. I think it's just harder for them to develop that because of the lack of depth in the network.
Hey, Jeff. You alluded to Amazon obviously being a mammoth in most verticals, with one exception being apparel. Why do you think they've struggled in that specific vertical?
Amazon for me is a search company. And that was the thesis of the Google thing. My partner Mark calls e-commerce 1.0, which is eBay and Amazon, e-commerce for nerds. You put a keyword phrase into a search box and it returns results, and you buy those results, which I think is a pretty fair characterization. Apparel, you don't typically, red dress, just kind of like, and so I think a lot of I think there's a renaissance and innovation in e-commerce around distribution methods, curation, sourcing that is both tries to navigate around Amazon and tries to do what they don't do well. So I'm a big Fab shopper, not surprisingly, but so most of my office is decorated in stuff I bought on Fab. Not one thing was I looking for. I mean, I couldn't have searched for it. I bought something called poofs. Do you know what a poof is? It's a little soft stool, but it was in the color scheme. I own poofs. I got these blocks of neon that I never thought of. I got artwork on the wall I wasn't looking for. Huge Lego blocks, that like this big in primary colors are under my table. So I mean, I'm kind of proud of how it looks, but not one thing in there would I have thought to search for. So for me, that's the antithesis of Amazon shopping. I think apparel is particularly suited to curation and browsing versus search. And so, I mean, I think it's not for lack of trying. I mean, they bought Zappos, My Habit. They're doing a lot of things, but it seems to be swimming upstream to what they are phenomenally good at, which is scale, logistics. Great search. I mean, I used to wonder why Amazon had done A9. Watch the search box when you start typing in a query on Amazon now. Their autofill's better than Google's. I mean, and that doesn't come easily. Yeah.
So I had a question more on the macro level of, you talk about balance and family time, and I'm curious in your experience and looking back on everything that you've accomplished. Obviously, I think we're all driven to success and try to get there as quickly as possible, almost so that we can get back to that balance and have the time with family and friends. Yeah. I think, looking back on it, do you feel, is there any way to achieve the similar levels of success while maintaining that balance throughout that entire time, or is it more a matter of redefining what we consider to be success?
I'm going to give a squishy answer. I think it can be done if you're willing to do it on your terms, and then part of that is making sure you have the abilities. I give huge kudos to Sheryl Sandberg, who decided at Facebook she was going to make dinner every night. So when I used to email with Mark, it would be pretty funny. I'd send him an email at 9 in the morning, and I'd get it back at 1:30 a.m. because that's when he was clearing out emails. So the culture there was way, way, way late. And Cheryl comes in as COO and makes dinner every night. Makes it home for dinner every night. And so there's a commitment there that suggests you can have a job like that and try to strive to do it. The harder part for me is the path to get there, because I'm not sure Cheryl started her career getting home for dinner, just so I do think there's some wasted energy and learning, because, you can't do a job like she's doing, just, hey, I'm gonna go try to be COO and build an ad network. I mean, she worked for Lawrence Summers, she worked at Google, she did that. So I never talked to her about, how she achieved balance over time, but it can be, an amazing thing happened to me at PayPal when I got there. So Meg did the succession planning. At some point, the board said we need a plan. She gave each of us 6 months to say, what do you want to do with your life? And I came back and surprised her saying, I don't want your job. So she had to rejigger it. So for me, essentially, when I said I was running one of the business units and I didn't want her job, kind of said, at some point I should get out of the way. So I viewed that as almost giving her notice. Basically saying, listen, I'm not going anywhere today, but if I'm not opting to go for your job, I'm not going to stay here forever. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's not good for you to have, one of the top jobs clogged up with someone who doesn't want yours. And so at that point, I made the mental decision, at some point I'm going to leave. And I moved over to PayPal, and at eBay, my calendar was a Tetris. Started at the latest at 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. I was booked every minute of every day. And then sometimes it bled outside. But then if you were going to do email or anything out, I mean, if you actually had work to do, it came out as the gauntlet of meetings, Tetris of meetings. So I went and said, okay, I'm going to try an experiment. Don't start meetings till 9, end them at 5. I became a much better manager. And it surprised the hell out of me. My management scores exploded. eBay, measured them, and it turned out I had to learn to delegate better. I said no to a lot of things. So it was the most interesting management thing that had ever happened to me. I supply constrained it, and my quality, my utilization got much higher. I was getting home, and my people were happier, and really good things were happening in the business. And it was like, it was a lesson I wish I'd learned earlier, or at least wish I'd tried earlier, because the 5 years at eBay, probably put 15 years on my life, but it was a really interesting learning for me, that it's just not input, it's output, what's important, what do you have to do. I do think you need some experience to be able to, you're saying no to a lot of things, and you have to be comfortable doing that. And so experience gives you a little bit of like, I really don't need to do that one. Or, I started maniacally measuring my calendar. I still do that now, because ironically, my balance has gone to hell since I joined Andreessen Horowitz. The VC lifestyle doesn't seem to be a VC lifestyle, at least where we practice it. And so I constantly measure put my calendar into an Excel spreadsheet to say, where am I spending my time? I did that at eBay, I did that at PayPal. I didn't do that at OpenTable as much, because it was a smaller environment I could do it. I'm absolutely doing it now, because it's instructive of like, oh my God, I spend 8 hours a week doing blah. And can anyone else do blah? Or is that high return from doing blah? And so the rationing time and the maniacal measurement of what am I doing with my time, and can anyone else do it? Is it worthwhile? Those have worked for me, quite well. I'm not sure my kids would tell me I've been the most outside. I've been as president as they might expect, but it's improved, so that which is important to me.
I heard a story where Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, would continue to say, family comes first, and his wife called him out on it. She's like, that's bullshit. Like, let me ask you, like, you say that, but it's, if you're supposed to come home for dinner and something comes up at work, what do you do? He's like, well, what have you done in the past? Stay at work.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty hard argument to fight against.
No, it is hard. The other thing is you can set a culture pretty well. Actually, I do say at work, family comes first, but it's particularly for the people who work for me. So, health and family. If something comes up with one of those, go home. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you have on your plate. Go home. You know, you can spend the time. If it's important, spend the time with the people you should be spending the time with. That for me has always created a culture that, you know, makes that decision, dinner or not, hopefully less unambiguous. And so, but you know, so actually, I mean, I'm a huge believer in that in management because I think, you know, it's fair to your people, it creates the right environment, and the loyalty you get from, you know, okay, you have something serious, go deal with it. You know, just tell me what I need to do to cover for you.
You should tell our legal counsel I had to force him to take vacation by threatening to fire him.
Excellent. Of course, which he sued you for. But that's
He actually explained that legally you can't. So we're going to take one last question.
You mentioned Airbnb when they got started, their focus was on products, but now they're taking it more end to end. When starting the two-sided marketplace, kind of your thoughts on hierarchy of products, supply and demand, are they all equal? Or kind of some thoughts on that?
I mean, for me, how you win in technology is you build great product. And every business I've been in that, you know, where, you know, it's growing well, you're keeping the growth going, you're doing it through product innovation. So at eBay, when I started running it was an auction business. And so we had the revolutionary concept of fixed price sales through Buy It Now. I mean, that exploded the business. We put in PayPal integration. PayPal helped grow the company. PayPal integration helped grow the business. You know, so you know, at OpenTable, heavy mobile and reviews, and you know, just made the website better. I mean, PayPal, the whole non-eBay component of it, making it industrial use. I mean, so for me, product is building a great product is a precondition. Then you know, but I mean, I think an observation Todd from eBay had that I think is important is eBay. When I ran it, we were focused on the product. They, over time, became much more focused on the beginning to end user experience. And when the product innovation slowed, and they slowed. I mean, they slow in a company. It's hard to keep high impact product innovations going forever. They then grew the business through the enhanced experience. So, you know, they dramatically increased the number of goods that the seller offered with free shipping. They took a lot of community heat by biasing towards sellers with great service levels. And, you know, so the experience improved from doing all those things. And so I think, you know, the hierarchy of needs, for me, early on, it's product. But then, you know, sometimes you run into a supply-demand imbalance. You have to go try to figure it out. But, you know, in every business I've ever run, the first thing I did when I came in is double engineers. At OpenTable, we did it twice. At PayPal, we did it twice. So 4x engineers in between 2 to 4 years, just because I wanted the pace of product innovation to be dramatically different than what we inherited. And every time I did it, it worked. And I would do it again. I mean, just so, for me, I just was advocating it at Airbnb an hour ago, you know, just double engineers. But it's, I mean, for me, the product is what has all the leverage, and we look for product pickers, product builders.
Thanks.
Great.
So this is the second time we've done an event like this. If you enjoy this, then email Jerome, jkwade@balancepayments.com. Let us know, and we may do more. We have the most important food groups: coffee, pizza, and beer. Your way out. And
It's a balanced diet.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I want to thank Jeff for coming.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And
Karaoke starts now, yeah.
now my prediction, based on the feedback you gave on advisors, that you're going to get mauled by everybody here.
Excellent, yeah. I'll get the beer then. Thanks very much, everyone. Yeah, appreciate it.
I wanted to ask a question.